Welcome, everybody. Last winter, I attended a meeting at Ramana Ashram at which I was asked by Zareen and Shalini to start giving a series of talks for the London Ramana Foundation. When I asked for suggested topics, the first one was to focus on the devotees who had been written about in my Power of the Present series. These are 3 volumes in which I devote a whole chapter to devotees who had a close and well-documented connection to Bhagavan. The accounts are almost all first person. Behind me on the screen are the covers of the most recent editions. When I started the series, my focus was on manuscripts or books that had not previously appeared in English. I later dropped that restriction. The first editions of these books came out well over 20 years ago, and they've been reprinted several times without any changes. About 6 years ago, I decided to overhaul the series completely by making new editions that would include extensive photos. Sundaram, the Ramana Ashram president at the time, gave me permission to use as many as I needed. So far, I've only completely remade and published part 2. The other 2 expanded volumes have yet to appear. When I took the decision to update the books, I also decided to add an extra chapter to each volume, highlighting a new devotee. Volume 2, for example, included a chapter on the Swedish devotee and yogi Ramana Maharshi, who met Bhagavan in 1949. This is him behind me. The photo on the right was taken somewhere near Madurai where he had an ashram which was set up after Bhagavan passed away in 1950. I may do a talk on him later in the series, since I have discovered a lot more information about him since the reprint of part 2 was made. I have been contacted by a very industrious Swedish scholar who is researching him, and a lot of new information has come to light, so that might come along later. My additional devotee for part 1 is Narayana Iyer, a devotee who moved closely with Bhagavan for more than 20 years. This is him sitting with Bhagavan in the old hall with an additional headshot of him on the left. Narayana Iyer was one of those fortunate devotees who could be effortlessly natural in Bhagavan's presence. I think that Bhagavan responded well to people like this. The 2 of them had many remarkable meetings and exchanges, most of which will occur in this talk. I have completed all the layout work for the new edition of part 1, but I'm not going to publish it until I run out of copies of the old printing, the one that doesn't have the photos or the Narayana Iyer chapter. It might be a year or 2 before it comes out. So as a preview of forthcoming attractions, today, I'm going to read out the first half of this unpublished Narayana Iyer chapter. I will pause and digress from time to time because there are several topics and statements in the text that I intend to elaborate on. Since these extra expansions and interpolations are going to make it quite long, I'm going to split the talk into 2 halves and give the second half next month. In the August session, I will go through the second half of the Narayana Iyer chapter. This strategy of splitting will also give more time for a Q&A session at the end of each segment. Before I start, I want to make a few comments on this photo of Narayana Iyer sitting with Bhagavan in the old hall. It's one of my favorites because it contains some of the iconic features of Bhagavan's stay there. Note, for example, the revolving bookshelf between Narayana Iyer and Bhagavan. This contained most of the books that Bhagavan regularly consulted. In the ashram literature, there are multiple instances reported of Bhagavan reaching out to get a book from this revolving bookshelf and then having it fall open at the exact page or verse he was looking for. There was an additional library in the old hall that was housed in glass-fronted cupboards. Devotees took it in turns to look after the publicly available books and issue them to devotees who wanted to read them. Devaraj Mudalya, in his memoir, reported that he took over this job for a while in the 1940s. When I took over the ashram library in the late 1970s, these cupboards that used to be in the old hall had been moved to the new hall, but they were still full of the books that were in the old hall library in the 1930s and 40s, and they formed the basis of the library which I started there. When I gave the talk on the power of the Guru last month, I mentioned that around 1980, I was given the opportunity to catalogue many of Bhagavan's books and manuscripts that had ended up in a big cupboard in the ashram office. When Bhagavan moved to the Nirvana room for the final year of his life, this revolving bookshelf went with him, and that's where I found it around 1980 while I was doing the cataloguing. As you can imagine, it was full of archival treasures, proof copies of ashram books edited by Bhagavan, personal copies of Tamil texts that he regularly consulted or read from, notebooks that contained his handwritten versions of many texts, and so on. It even, I seem to remember, contained an ancient 19th century German edition of Kaivalya Navanitam. Everything that was found on these shelves is now stored and preserved in the Ramanaswaram archive building, with a little note to say that they were originally on this revolving bookshelf. In front of Bhagavan, you can see the kumati, the small charcoal brazier that was used to keep Bhagavan and the devotees warm on cold winter mornings. And above him is a punkah fan. This was a giant hand-woven panel made of coconut fronds that was pulled backwards and forwards via a pulley system operated by somebody outside the window. Bhagavan did not appear to appreciate the electric fans that were eventually installed in the hall. He is on record as saying that sweating was good for the body. However, he didn't seem to mind the punkah blade being pulled from time to time to stir up the air. The most iconic feature is, of course, the sofa itself. Bhagavan originally sat on a very low raised platform in the corner of this hall. A devotee called Rangaswami Gaunda donated the sofa to Bhagavan in the late 1920s and requested him to sit on it. Bhagavan didn't want this special treatment and he initially refused. Gaunda begged and pleaded for 3 days, I think, until Bhagavan eventually relented. I think he agreed to sit on Rangaswami's gift just to keep him quiet. He was making a lot of noise. Kunji Swami has recorded that soon afterwards, Rangaswami was given the nickname Sofa Gaunda for somehow persuading Bhagavan to get onto this sofa and stay there. Bhagavan generally opposed devotees' efforts to give him special treatment. Getting him to sit on an elevated sofa while everyone else sat on the floor was considered to be such a major accomplishment, it was worthy of being given a lifelong nickname. Now time to start the story of Narayana Iyer. It begins with some introductory comments by Arthur Osborne, seen here on the right on the veranda of his Ramananagar home. At the top on the left, there is a photo of Arthur, and sitting next to him, his wife Lucia, in the ashram dining room. Narayana Iyer's house was on the same street as the Osbornes, and their front gates were only about 100 meters apart. I imagine they had a lot of contact in the 1950s and 60s. I showed this 1961 photo last month. I'm putting it up again here because it has Lucia Osborne circled in red on the left, Narayana Iyer in the center, and Arthur Osborne on the right. When I arrived at Ramanaswaram in 1976, it was still largely a community of people who had known Bhagavan and spent time at the ashram with him. I would guess that about a quarter of the people who lived there when I arrived had stories about being with Bhagavan. This photo was taken about 15 years before I arrived. I'm guessing that more than half of the people in it would have had the opportunity to spend time with Bhagavan. This is what Arthur Osborne wrote in an article on Narayana Iyer he penned for The Mountain Path while he was its editor in the mid-1960s. In those days, there was a regular feature entitled Introducing, in which the editor wrote about devotees who had personal contact with Bhagavan. This one begins. Sri R. Narayana Iyer, an old devotee, a retired sub-registrar, is one of the senior-most devotees of Sri Bhagavan and one who enjoyed some special privileges. Soon after he came to Sri Bhagavan, he began to move with him more like a resident of the ashram than a casual visitor. Initially, he was an out-and-out skeptic with ultra-modern views and ways, but very soon he became a staunch follower and devotee of Sri Bhagavan. Osborne's account continues. The familiarity and freedom with which he moved with Sri Bhagavan can be understood from the fact that he was chiefly responsible for eliciting a good deal of information about the family in Tiruturi, including their financial difficulties, which necessitated borrowings and alienation of family properties. He assisted the ashram management in redeeming these properties and preserving them as sacred monuments. The Tiruturi birthplace is now known as Sundara Mandiram, while the Madurai house where he attained self-realization is called Ramana Mandiram. As a government official whose office dealt with the registration of official documents, it is not surprising that he also played a prominent part in the execution of the will of Sri Bhagavan. Narayana Iyer is often identified in Ramanaswaram books and photos as Sub-Registrar Narayana Iyer. His job was to head the offices where official documents such as wills and property sale deeds were stored. The photo at the bottom is the Tiruturi house where Bhagavan's family lived until 1892. This is how it looked before Ramanaswaram took it over and turned it into a temple. This is Arthur Osborne in his younger days, possibly in the 1940s. It looks like it's somewhere in the vicinity of Ramanashram. He continues. There were occasions on which Sri Bhagavan took special notice of him. For instance, when a film was about to be shown in the dining hall at 5 p.m., Bhagavan declined to go there till Narayana Iyer, who was expected at 7 p.m., arrived. As a result, a large number of people who had gathered in the hall had to wait a long time for the show. It was he who asked for a clarification of the state of a family man who follows the path of jnana, and to whom Sri Bhagavan said, remaining as a family man, you can certainly engage in spiritual practice. Even better than the man who thinks, I have renounced everything, is the one who does his duty but does not think, I do this or I am the doer. The sannyasi who thinks I am a sannyasi cannot be a true sannyasi, whereas a householder who does not think I am a householder is truly a sannyasi. And Osborne concluded, Sri Narayana Iyer was the first person to construct a house in the Ramana Nagar colony. He still lives here. This was written in the 1960s, and narrates to those who seek the grace, love, and splendor of Sri Bhagavan. This photo shows Narayana Iyer with his wife Lalita and their son. They are sitting in the garden of their Saraswati Nilayam house in Ramananagar. There is a large and very good well on this property. Before construction started, Narayana Iyer apparently showed a map of the plot to Bhagavan and asked him where the well should be dug. Bhagavan pointed with his finger, and that's where it was dug. It turned out to be the best well in the neighborhood. When there were summer droughts, which were quite frequent, this will be the last functioning well, and neighbors and devotees were allowed in to take water from it if their own wells had dried up. This is where Narayana Iyer's own account begins. In the photo on the bottom right, he is sitting at the end of the front row. Munagala Venkatramaya, the compiler of talks with Sri Ramana Maharshi, is between him and Bhagavan. And the distinguished looking foreigner behind them is Grant Duff, a senior British government official of the era. Narayana Iyer begins his tale in the following way. It was in the year 1928 or maybe 1929. I think I've proved to my own satisfaction it was 1928, but his memory is a bit off when he wrote this. I was employed at Chetpet, a township 30 miles from Tiruvannamalai. My only friend and constant companion there was Dr. V. Ramakrishna Iyer, a versatile man of many parts, rather religious but not of the orthodox type. He was very genial and entertaining, and I would now deem him to be a Purushottama, the best of men. He subsequently proved himself to be a friend, a philosopher, and a guide. At the time, I was his opposite. I was an out-and-out skeptic with no religion in me. I was scornful in my references to sadhus, sannyasis, and swamis, believing all to be impostors, parasites on society, who exploited credulous folk for personal ends. I felt they accepted homage and hero worship, believing they were superior to ordinary men. Now, this is an interesting group photo that contains Narayana Iyer's friend, Dr. Ramakrishna Iyer. He's circled in red on the left. Narayana Iyer is circled in red on the right. It may well have been taken on Narayana Iyer's first visit to Bhagavan in late 1928. I'll tell you why I think that's the date. Ganapati Muni, seated next to Bhagavan on the front row, left Tiruvannamalai in 1929 and never returned. Likewise, B.V. Narasimha Swami, the bearded man holding the book. He also left Tiruvannamalai in 1929. I think this photo was probably taken around the time of the Kartikai Deepan festival of 1928, which would have been in November or December that year. Narayana Iyer continues. Dr. Ramakrishna Iyer is the son of the late Lakshmi Amal, a friend and playmate of Sri Bhagavan in his boyhood days at Tiruchuli. She also came from that place. Dr. Ramakrishna Iyer was therefore well acquainted with Bhagavan and was an occasional visitor to Sri Ramanasramam. Around 1928, he asked me to go to Tiruvannamalai with him during the festival of Kartikai Deepan. This is an enlarged crop taken from the previous photo. Narayana Iyer is in the center. The man on the front left of the photo is Dandapani Swami, who managed the ashram for several years in the 1920s. He was still the manager when Narayana Iyer first met Bhagavan in 1928. Narayana Iyer continues. I disliked crowds and knew their huge numbers would make the town an unsanitary place for the duration of the festival. In addition, as a non-believer, the pomp and pageantry of the temple festival had no attraction for me. Despite these reservations, I agreed to accompany him since I didn't wish to hurt his feelings. However, I requested that I be left with my parents, who were also going to attend the festival. They would be staying in the town. Dr. Ramakrishna intended to spend most of his time at Ramanaswaram. When we arrived at the house where my parents were staying, I discovered that many families were sharing it. It was very overcrowded. This tends to happen at Deepan. You can't expect to have a room to yourself if you arrive in the middle of the Deepan festival. I told my friend, Doctor, I cannot stay here. There's not even space to breathe. Your ashram will have plenty of open air, sunshine, and shady trees. I would rather go there and stay outside while you go in and do whatever you want to do. I'm going to go on a little digression here, since Narayana Iyer mentioned the shady trees that he was hoping to find at Ramanaswaram. Reading accounts of the early years of Ramanaswaram, there were always stories of the forests that were on Arunachala. I've seen many old photos of the mountain going back to the first 2 decades of the 20th century, but I've never seen a photo in which the mountain appeared to have extensive forests, just occasional patches of trees. I asked Annamalai Swami about this. He arrived in Tiruvannamalai at the end of 1928, almost exactly the same time that Narayana Iyer first arrived. Annamalai Swami told me a story of how he, Ganapati Muni, and Bhagavan sneaked out of the ashram after lunch one day and made their way to the Katu Siva forest, a little over 2 kilometers from Ramanaswaram. Bhagavan took Ganapati Muni with him because he wanted to show him a special tree that had been mentioned in a famous Sanskrit text. That's Ganapati Muni sitting with Bhagavan on the left, and Annamalai Swami is standing on the top left of the other photo. Both of these pictures were taken around the time that this walk to the forest took place. When Ganapati Muni lived on the hill in the Skandashram era, he'd had a remarkable Kundalini experience in which the bones in his skull actually moved a little, causing him a lot of pain and discomfort. Bhagavan came to his rescue on that occasion, but in the years that followed, Ganapati Muni was unable to tolerate direct sunlight on the top of his head, the place where the bones had moved. So I asked Annamalai Swami how Ganapati Muni had managed to walk the 2 kilometers in the early afternoon to get to the Katu Siva forest. He told me that when he first came to Ramanaswaram in late 1928, there was still a strip of forest at the foot of the hill that went all the way from Ramanaswaram to the Katu Siva forest, and that it had a dense enough canopy to keep the sun off Ganapati Muni's sensitive head. This last residue of the formerly extensive Arunachala forests was enough to support a small but declining number of leopards who lived near Ramanaswaram. Annamalai Swami was briefly Bhagavan's attendant in early 1929, soon after he arrived. One of his jobs was to go out with Bhagavan in the middle of the night if they needed a toilet break, and that would happen at the back of the ashram where the gate to Skandashram is now located. Bhagavan and Annamalai Swami would occasionally have to shoo away loitering leopards so they could do their bathroom business in peace. So when Narayana Iyer said he hoped he could enjoy some fresh air and trees in the vicinity of Ramanaswaram, he was definitely going to the right place. It was the perfect place to dodge the Deepam crowds in town and enjoy the shade of the trees. Annamalai Swami told me that the remaining forest was felled in the years that followed, but in 1928, the time when this story takes place, the tree cover was still quite substantial. One final little postscript to this story about forests. In 1930, when Paul Brunton arrived at Ramanaswaram for the first time, he described it as a jungle hermitage. In the West, we nowadays tend to use the word in a different way to it was originally used in India. We think of a jungle as being a dense, luxuriant tropical forest, but the word actually comes from the Sanskrit terms that means rough, arid, or uncultivated land. It also has the connotations of a wild and uninhabited area, a description that very much fitted the area surrounding Ramanaswaram in 1930. In those days, there were a few clumps of trees, but very few residents outside the ashram perimeter. Narayana Iyer continues his account of his first visit to Ramanaswaram. Writing, he, Dr. Ramakrishna, said yes, and took me to the ashram, which was a mile or so from the town. On the way, I repeated my opinion of the so-called holy men and said to him, I will not come in or join in any of your tomfoolery. If by chance I meet your Swami, I will not prostrate before him. I mean no insult, but I cannot do what is against my conviction. I don't believe that any man, however great, has a right to accept the homage of others just because he has learned to memorize and quote scriptures or sacred law. This is how Ramanaswaram looked in the early 1930s, a couple of years after Narayana Iyer's first visit. At the top, the white building on the right is the old hall. It was completed in 1928, around the time of Narayana Iyer's first visit. I think it was probably there when he first visited. Behind it are three buildings with pitched roofs situated on the land that is now occupied by Bhagavan Samadhi Hall. These are the buildings that contained the original dining room and kitchen, and behind those three roofs, and at 90 degrees to them, is the long thatched roof of the Mother's Temple, as it was in those days. Bhagavan lived in an annex there for a few years before moving to the new hall. Narayana Iyer first listened to Bhagavan teach in the area of the Mother's Temple. That's the thatched building at the back where he lived and slept. The building in the bottom photo is the front of the old dining room. For those of you who've been to Ramanaswaram and want to get your bearings, look across the roof and you can see the roof of the old hall and Arunachala in the background. This indicates it was taken from the area that is now close to the Nirvana room. Narayana Iyer now describes his first visit to Ramanaswaram and his first meeting with Bhagavan. With this warning to my friend, we came to the ashram. It then comprised just three thatched sheds a little away from the road, which one could reach by a narrow footpath amongst thorns and bushes. We walked in. A man in a white loincloth, a towel suspended on his shoulder, a kamandalu water pot in one hand and a walking stick in another, saw us and stopped his walk, which was taking him away from us. And here is Bhagavan, more or less, as described by Narayana Iyer, with his walking stick and a towel over his shoulder. The man behind him is Madhava Swami, his attendant. Narayana Iyer continues. The doctor hastened towards him. I slowly followed. The doctor was greeted very kindly and was asked about the welfare of his mother and brother. Remember, Bhagavan was brought up with his mother. They were childhood friends in Tiruchuli. It must be the Maharshi, I thought, but I didn't look up as he was a complete stranger to me. Then I heard my friend saying, "This is the sub-registrar of Chetput." Out of courtesy, I looked at him. What a wonderful face and what a welcoming smile. Bewitching, fascinating, and a powerful look too. In a moment, I was at his feet, prostrating on the gravel ground. I soon regained my self-possession and felt ashamed of my earlier skepticism. I should not have been so hasty in expressing my views to the doctor, I thought. Narayana Iyer had felt himself compelled to prostrate at the feet of Bhagavan, even though he had arrived at Ramanasramam as a complete skeptic. This happened to several new people who had arrived as cynics or skeptics, or merely wanted to come and see what was going on. Annamalai Swami told me a nice story about a Christian priest who, believing in the superiority of Christianity, was determined not to show formal respect to Bhagavan, but who in the end felt compelled to prostrate full length on the ground in front of him. Annamalai Swami laughed when he was telling me the story. He said he saw the priest swaying backwards and forwards, trying to resist the urge to go to the ground. And when he did eventually topple over, Annamalai Swami said it was like watching a felled tree fall to the ground. The priest finally appeared to have no control over his actions. Narayana Iyer continues, two persons whom I had seen before had impressed me with their powerful personality, Mahatma Gandhi and Rabindranath Tagore. This person surpasses them, I said to myself, not bogus, looks genuine, yet I must find out from him about his greatness and how he is entitled to the homage of others and how he accepts it. Has he solved the mystery of life, the universe, and what we see before us? If not, I will withdraw my homage and go my way. This is Bhagavan walking in the ashram with his Kamandalu water pot and walking stick. The attendant is behind. With a pleasing smile, this is Narayana Iyer again, with a pleasing smile, he, Bhagavan, said, "You have a couple of days' leave, do you not? You can stay in the ashram. I will be there in a few minutes." I think Bhagavan recognized some connection with Narayana Iyer in inviting him to stay at the ashram. He was not just being hospitable. In general, Bhagavan didn't like visitors to think that he was responsible for letting people stay or not stay in the ashram or have meals there. He would usually subcontract decisions such as these to whoever was managing the ashram. Then when people asked if they could stay, he would refer them to the ashram office, claiming he had no authority in these matters. I think he recognized Narayana Iyer as someone special and went out of his way to make sure he spent time in the ashram. Narayana Iyer continues, "I dared not say anything. I was dazed. Soon, though, I recovered and wanted to find out if he had written any book. I got a copy of Reality in 40 Verses, Ulladu Narpadu in Tamil, just published. I tried to read the first stanza. I could not follow it. The words seemed too closely packed and somehow jumbled together to form a stanza. There is more dating evidence in this final paragraph. Ulladu Narpadu was composed in 1928. Muruganar, who was encouraging Bhagavan to write verses on specific topics, noted in his journal when each verse was completed. According to Muruganar, the last verse was composed on August 31st, 1928, and the whole work was published shortly afterwards. Narayana Iyer turned up in the ashram about 2 months after this. I, Narayana Iyer, thought to myself, can he not say what he has to say in some intelligible language? Someone nearby said that it had been arranged that the Maharshi himself would explain to us the 40 verses that night. I prevailed upon my friend, Dr. Ramakrishna, to prolong our visit. He was astonished by my sudden and unexpected burst of enthusiasm. In anxious and eager suspense, I waited for the night. The Maharshi sat on a raised pile or dais inside a shed containing his mother's samadhi. Apparently, he used to remain most of the time there. Night came. About half a dozen of us were seated on the ground before him. A solemn stillness pervaded the air. there was absolute silence, except for an occasional chirping of a bird or the hooting of an owl. I mentioned this building a few minutes ago. It's the long thatched building at the back of this photo. One portion of it contains the Mother's Samadhi, the other half was used by Bhagavan as his living quarters up to about 1928. As a reference point, the old hall is the white building on the right in the foreground. I think the old hall was available when Narayana Iyer first visited in 1928, but judging by this story, it would seem that Bhagavan was still spending a lot of his time in his old quarters in the annex to the Mother's Temple. People tend to forget that Bhagavan spent several years from 1922 to around 1928 living, sleeping, and teaching in this thatched building. We have no photos of how the interior of Bhagavan's living and teaching space looked in those days, but we do have a couple of photos of Bhagavan in the Mother's Temple before it was upgraded into the granite structure we see today. Here he is on the top right, standing next to the lingam over his Mother's Samadhi. This is the first proper building, superseding the coconut leaf structure that was erected soon after his mother was interred. For much of the time that Bhagavan lived and taught there, between, say, 1923, 1928, it was a brick building with a pitched thatched roof. You can just see the edge of the pitched roof at the top of the photo that appears at the bottom of the slide. Since 1949, the whole temple has been made out of granite. There is incidentally a lovely story narrated by Kanjiswami, in which he tells how Bhagavan and all the devotees in the ashram went to Palakottu one evening to convey back to the ashram a huge pile of bricks which hadn't fired properly. Bhagavan abhorred waste. He realized these bricks had been abandoned, so he arranged a chain of people passing bricks to each other. A big pile was made in the ashram, and this big pile was subsequently used to raise the first proper building over his mother's samadhi. Narayana Iyer now describes how Bhagavan read out his composition. The Maharshi read the first stanza. The mere reading of the stanza made the meaning as simple as simplicity itself. The word Ulladu, which had previously been giving me problems, was just used in the sense of being or reality as noun, verb, and adjective. Stanza by stanza he read and explained in a voice that was so sweet and melodious. Ulladu literally means that which is. The title of the work, Ulladu Narpadu, means 40 on that which is. The 40, of course, refers to the 40 verses that comprise the main body of the work. Before I continue with Narayana Iyer's account, I'm going to take quite an extensive detour and explain in some detail the contents of this verse that Narayana Iyer had initially found to be so perplexing and confusing. It is the first benedictory verse. It's a lovely verse, but I'll explain why I'm going into such detail once I've gone through its contents. This is what it says in the original Tamil, middle right, with an English translation below. A transliteration appears in the top left with all the oral syllables highlighted in red. I will explain the significance of these later. At the bottom, there is a translation of the verse, and it reads, "Could there be a being consciousness existing apart from that which eternally is? Since that reality exists in the heart, free of thought, who could meditate upon that reality called the heart? Know that to remain within the heart as it is truly to meditate upon the heart." The idea being articulated here by Bhagavan is that being or beingness alone exists, and that nothing can be distinct or separate from it. There is nothing that knows that beingness, so it is not possible to focus on it via an entity that assumes that it is separate from the beingness and thinks that it needs to do something to discover it. As Bhagavan points out in the verse, this beingness is discovered to be what one truly is when one abides in the heart as the heart. It's not discovered by attempting to reach it from a position that's separate from the beingness. The highlighted red syllables in the English transliteration at the top are all the occurrences of ol, an archaic Tamil root form of the verb to be. The ol in this syllable is made by bending the tongue backwards and putting it on the roof of the mouth, giving the resulting sound a strong nasal component. These ol syllables are the scaffolding of the verse, combining with all the other syllables and words to make an intricate and complex tapestry of philosophical ideas that encapsulate Bhagavan's core teaching on beingness, our true and abiding nature. And watch how many times the ol sound comes up. It's basically Bhagavan saying being, being, be, is. And all the subsequent philosophy comes from words or syllables which are attached to this root form of the verb to be. It's not surprising then that Narayana Iyer, even though he was a native Tamilian, didn't really make much sense of it. He, up till that point, had been a long-term religious skeptic who had probably not been exposed to these Advaitic ideas before. Here is a short video of the verse being chanted. I hope it plays. I found it on YouTube. I'm using this version rather than the one that is chanted at Ramana because it is chanted very slowly and clearly. It makes it much easier for those who are not familiar with the Tamil to recognize the repeated oral components that structure the philosophy and meter of the verse.
Ulladu Narpadu. உள்ளதலதுள்ள உணர்வுள்ளதோ உள்ளபொருள் உள்ளலற உள்ளத்தே உள்ளதால் உள்ளமெனும் உள்ளபொருள் உள்ளலவன் உள்ளத்தே உள்ளபடி உள்ளதே உள்ளல் உணர்வாயே.
This is what Professor K. Swaminathan wrote about this wonderful invocatory verse. He said, or wrote, the first stanza, woven out of pure Tamil words, is an emphatic assertion of the oneness of being, awareness, and the heart. It dwells lovingly on the Tamil root ol, common to being, thinking, heart, and inner space, all associated with indivisible oneness and wholeness. The verb ol, to be, which admits of no past or future tense, is repeated 8 times. The word olam, the heart, thrice, olu, to think, thrice. Thus the Vemba verse as a whole, through sound, suggestion, and explicit statement, pulls the mind inwards to the very heart of being, awareness. The repeated ol syllables are a reminder that reality is nothing but beingness itself, something that can only be directly known by recognizing oneself to be that beingness. Professor Swaminathan, I will point out for those who don't know, was a distinguished Tamil and English scholar who edited The Mountain Path for many years. He was also the editor of Gandhi's collected works, a mammoth undertaking that eventually filled 100 volumes. Muruganal commented on the many creative ways that Bhagavan used ol in this verse in Upadesha Tiruvahaval, one of the poems in Sri Ramana Sannidhi Murai. This is what he wrote there. The place where Ullal, thought, arises and subsides is Ullam, the heart. Thus you gave out the meaning of Ullam, praise be to you. You declared in Ulladu, that which is, exists in Ullam, the heart. Ulladu, that which is, itself may be said to be Ullam, the heart. Praise be to you. Ulladu, rendered here as that which is often translated as reality, hence the common title of this work by Bhagavan, Reality, Ulladu, in 40 verses. But more literally, it just means what is or that which is. It's a combination of the 2 syllables, Ulla, meaning is, and Adu, meaning that. And as the verse points out, that which is real, that which is just beingness itself. The photo, by the way, is of Muruganar sitting next to Bhagavan in 1923. Muruganar, seen here sitting with Bhagavan in the late 1940s, continues with his explanation of this verse. You also declared as the experienced Nam Ulam, we are, exists there. It can be termed Ulam, the heart. This is another very fortuitous overlapping that adds another level of meaning to this verse. In addition to meaning the heart, Ullam is also the first person plural form of the verb to be, we are. Muruggana has commented on this combination of meanings in an explanatory note he wrote to verse 966 of Guru Vajka Kovai, and this is what he wrote there. The one reality, Atma Swarupa, exists and shines in the heart, one without a second. Appearing as if it is many, it shines as I in every individual being, who seem to be many because of upadis, limiting ideas and associations. Therefore, the plural term, Ullam, meaning we are, is appropriate. Because the heart is the place for the existing and shining of the Atma Swarupa, in Tamil, the heart is known as Ullam. The word Ullam here gives both meanings simultaneously. That means both the heart and we are. In modern Tamil, the am suffix in Ullam indicates the first person plural, we are, but in older Tamil literature, Ullam could also be taken to be the singular form, am or I am. Thus, Ullam serendipitously can be taken to be both I am and the heart. That's what makes this verse so wonderful, that there's all the overlapping of all the possible meanings of Ul and its various combinations. Sadhu Om made this connection in his own comment on verse 712 of Guru Vajka Kovai, writing these words that appear on the screen. Since the Tamil word Ullam, which means heart, also means am, the shining of the reality, I, the reality is called by the name Ullam. The photo on the screen shows Sadhu Om and Muruggana sitting with Bhagavan in the late 1940s. The three nearest devotees in front of Bhagavan are right to left, Sadhu Om, Muruggana, and Viswanatha Swami. This is the only photo we have of Sadhu Om and Bhagavan together. This lovely overlapping of meanings explained in the previous slides reveals the identity of the heart, or Lam, and the state of being, the I amness that is its essence and true nature. That which is, Ulladu, is identical with the heart, Ullam. Nothing can be predicated to this beingness, it just is, and the only way to know it is to be it. With its elegant plays on the syllable Ul and its strict metrical form, the first invocatory verse of Ulladu Narpadu is now widely regarded as being a literary tour de force. The following appreciative comments recorded by Kanji Swami, seen here standing on the top right of the photo, come from a distinguished Tamil scholar. Kanji Swami wrote, "Once while going on a pilgrimage, I, Kanji Swami, visited various mats before ending up at Parayur Santalinga mat. At that time, Veera Sabaya Swami Gaur was resting there because he was not well. When I went and had his darshan, he made kind inquiries about the welfare of Sri Bhagavan and the ashram in general. He also looked into the notebook I had with me. Seeing in it the verses of Ulladu Narpadu, written beautifully by Sri Bhagavan himself, he asked me to read them out to him. He appreciated the first benedictory verse so much, he asked me to read it 3 times. Kanji Swami continues, here he is in a different photo, and again at the top right of it, he wrote, after the 3rd reading, he, Veera Sabaya Swami Gaur, remarked, this is a very profound verse. Not only that, all the elegant features of prosody are in it. Until now, I was under the impression that your Swami was an adept only in keeping still, but now I discover that he is also a superb writer of fine poetry. The Venba is itself a difficult meter that few poets dare attempt. Bhagavan has composed all 42 verses in this meter and used them to convey the most abstruse philosophical ideas. Crowning them all, though, is this first invocatory verse. Before I set off on this long and detailed tangent on the fascinating linguistic components and the deep philosophical significance of this verse, I promised to explain why I thought it was important to do so. To start the explanation, I'm going to repeat what Narayana Iyer originally wrote. He wrote, the Maharshi read the first stanza. The mere reading of the stanza made the meaning as simple as simplicity itself. The word Ulladu, which had previously been giving me problems, was just used in the sense of being or reality as noun, verb, and adjectives. These lines are, as I just explained at some length, a dense and intricate rendering of Advaitic philosophical ideas that Narayana Iyer had previously expressed zero interest in, and they were laid out in a way that could only be truly understood if one was, skipped a slide by mistake. They were laid out in a way that could only be truly understood if one was familiar with literary Tamil and some of its archaic vocabulary. One would also need to be familiar with the core Vedantic assumption that Atman is beingness itself and that nothing exists apart from it to seek it or know it. I doubt very much that Narayana Iyer had that kind of background and knowledge on the day he first met Bhagavan. And yet, despite this, the meaning was immediately clear to him as Bhagavan read out the verse. It's important to note that the understanding came from simply hearing the words being read out, not from Bhagavan's subsequent explanation of them. The scholars I cited in my own explanations of this verse, Muruganar, Sadhu Om, Professor Swaminathan, and Veera Subhaya Swamigao, all could appreciate the nuances of these lines because they had spent years studying literary Tamil, and in addition, they would have had a deep knowledge of the ideas that these lines are embodying. So how did Narayana Iyer get to an understanding of this verse so quickly and so easily? I think the words revealed their meaning to Narayana Iyer because as Bhagavan was reciting them, they settled in his heart and were not collected, processed, or thought about in his mind. If a jnani is speaking and describing the nature of reality, there is often a power in those words that enables one to experience the truth of those words directly. You don't have to think about them. In this situation, the words are not processed by the mind and stored in the memory. They bypass the mind, they enter the heart, and directly reveal their truth there. That evening, Bhagavan was planting these words in Narayana Iyer's consciousness, completely bypassing his intellect, which had already decided that the verse was incomprehensible. I'm not saying that Narayana Iyer had a direct experience of the self in that moment. I think it would be more accurate to say that the light of the self working through Sri Bhagavan's words illuminated Narayana Iyer's intellect in such a way that a proper and complete understanding of the words settled in him. I think that Bhagavan recognized that the verses of Ulladu Narpadu resonated deeply with Narayana Iyer. Later on, with Bhagavan's approval and permission, Narayana Iyer took up the chanting of the whole of Ulladu Narpadu as his principal sadhana. The photo on the right, by the way, is of Narayana Iyer standing behind Bhagavan on Arunachala. He is the one wearing the white shirt. Chinnaswami is the other person standing. I'm now going back to Narayana Iyer's description of what happened when Bhagavan read and explained the verses of Ulladu Narpadu for the first time. Stanza by stanza, he read and explained in a voice that was so sweet and melodious. The climax came. Explaining one verse, he said, God cannot be seen with our eyes or known by our sense perceptions. That is what is meant by saying to see God is to become God. Bhagavan's reading was then interrupted by Dandapani Swami, the ashram manager at the time. He is the large man standing next to Bhagavan, circled in red. Narayana Iyer appears as a young man in the top right of the photo, just behind him. Narayana Iyer wrote, one man from the small audience, a large person with a severe expression named Dandapani Swami interposed. Is Bhagavan saying this out of personal experience? The question, asked bluntly with such naivety, was answered with equal candor. How else would I dare say so? This was a major turning point for Narayana Iyer. He had heard the Upadeshas contained in the benedictory verse, and those meanings had miraculously settled inside him and revealed their meaning and significance, even though he had no background in the literary Tamil or the philosophy that they were drawn up from. But there was still the lingering question, what authority does this man have to make these utterances? Remember, Narayana Iyer had started the day as a complete spiritual skeptic. He had told his friend, Dr. Ramakrishna, I will not prostrate before him. I don't believe anyone has the right to accept the homage of others. This conviction was completely upended by this meeting with Bhagavan and by the reply he gave to Dandapani Swami when he was asked about the authority he had to say and write the things that he did. And this is what Narayana Iyer wrote next. That was enough for me. The reply to Dandapani Swami set me furiously thinking. What takes so much time to think flashed upon me in a moment. To see God is to become God. God cannot be known by our sense faculties. The only way was to become God. If he whom all religions acclaim to be God were to appear before one in flesh and blood, here he is. My body experienced a thrill from somewhere deep down in me. Thrill after thrill quivered and shook my frame. I went outside to compose myself. I came, he saw, he conquered. The photo is of Narayana Iyer standing on the hill with Bhagavan. He is the one with folded arms standing in the back row. Narayana Iyer now writes about his relationship with Bhagavan and how it developed. After this initial and convincing encounter, it was not a thirst for self-realization or spiritual development that impelled me and drew me to Sri Bhagavan. I had gained a mental conviction that he was who he claimed to be, but that conviction did not give me any direct spiritual insight of my own. Somehow or other, he appears to have discovered some truth, perhaps like Buddha under the Bodhi tree, I thought. The photo shows Bhagavan sitting in Ramana's ashram during its early years, probably a year or so before Narayana Iyer's first visit. Narayana Iyer continues, I simply loved him and longed to be in his company as much as possible. I felt a rapturous delight in hearing him talk. I was in the prime of youth, recently married and settled in a respectable government job. I was happy and satisfied with life as it was. I was in no need of the solace of religion or spirituality. Yet I discovered I could not leave him. The first impression of his beaming face, his sweet smile and endearing talk always danced before my eyes, drawing me from my usual routine and pursuits. I arranged with the doctor who first took me to Sri Bhagavan to pay 3-day monthly visits to the ashram. On the penultimate Saturday of each month, I would go for a weekend and add an extra day. My job gave me 15 days of casual leave each year. This arrangement worked well for a few years. He continues, my doctor friend Ramakrishna moved about the ashram as if he were one of the regular inmates. He would work in the kitchen on his visits and elsewhere if required. This voluntary work gave him the opportunity to be in Bhagavan's close proximity, since Bhagavan was a regular worker in the kitchen. The doctor brought me into the kitchen and I was accepted there as a worker on the days I visited. This privilege gave me the opportunity to spend more time with Bhagavan and to be in close contact with him, since he presided over the kitchen and participated in all the work that went on there. This photo is appearing several times today because it clearly shows the layout of Ramana Ashram around the early 1930s. As I mentioned before, the old hall, completed in 1928, is on the right. Further away from the camera and at 90 degrees to the hall are the pitched roofs of the buildings that comprise the kitchen and dining areas. This is where Dr. Ramakrishna and Narayana Iyer would have helped Bhagavan with the kitchen work. Bhagavan would get up very early to do this work. If you were taken on as a kitchen worker to work alongside him, you would be expected to be there ready to start at 4 a.m. in the morning. If you look closely at the old hall on the right of it, you can see a chimney on the roof. I've been told that it was at one time planned to use the building as a new kitchen. Chinnaswamy, Bhagavan's brother, wanted Bhagavan to continue to stay in the Mother's Temple and not move to the old hall, and to use the newly constructed hall as a kitchen and dining room. I have inserted a photo of Chinnaswamy in the bottom left of the ashram scene. The other devotees mostly wanted to make a building for him to live and teach in, rather than something that would be used as a new kitchen. and those devotees eventually won out. The chimney and fireplace that were part of the original construction were dismantled in the 1930s when it became clear that the hall was never going to be used as a kitchen. Before I continue with Narayana Iyer, here is a lovely story recorded by Sadhu Natanananda from the era when the chimney still existed. This is what he wrote. The cause of all misery and evil, beginning with the birth experienced by jivas, is forgetfulness of the way they came. This is illustrated by the following story. In the hall where Bhagavan used to give darshan, there was a chimney. The chimney was closed on all sides with steel mesh, except at the bottom, inside the old hall near the floor. One day, a beautiful small bird somehow entered it and became trapped inside this chimney. The bird found itself trapped in conditions diametrically opposed to its natural environment, the vast space where it could fly freely. From the moment it entered the chimney, it was frantically struggling to escape, but all its efforts proved futile. Why? Because, forgetting the way it came, it was repeatedly trying to escape through all the closed routes. Sri Bhagavan took this opportunity to reveal a great truth. This is a photo of Sadhu Natanananda taken in the 1930s, around the time this incident happened. Sadhu Natanananda was actually my neighbor when I lived in the Osborne house in the 1970s. His front gate was almost directly opposite Narayana Iyer's front gate. Bhagavan continued, this bird has given up the all-pervasive space, its natural place of residence. It has been caught in this limited space, which is opposed to its nature. Not knowing how to escape from this prison, it is agitated and afraid. Like this bird, jivas have also given up their natural place of residence, the vast space of consciousness. Through the delusion of ignorance, they become trapped in the prison of the body. The photo is of Bhagavan sitting in the old hall, opposite to where the chimney would have been. Bhagavan continues, without knowing how to escape, they are tormented by various afflictions. The ceaseless efforts of this bird to reach its natural place of residence are unsuccessful because they are directed upwards, the way of bondage, instead of downwards, the way it came. Similarly, the reason why the jiva's ceaseless efforts to attain freedom are unsuccessful is because they too are directed outwards, the way of bondage, instead of inwards, the way they came. And Bhagavan concluded, the natural tendency of the bird to go upwards asserts itself even in its attempt for freedom. Likewise, the natural tendency of jivas to roam outwards asserts itself even in their attempts at liberation. This is the jiva's natural tendency. If through true discrimination and awareness the jiva is made to turn back from outward directed sight to inward sight, and if it remains fixed there, it is certain that it would attain liberation in an instant. Sadhu Natanananda's comment on this are the words on the screen. This one upadesha will be sufficient for those genuinely thirsting for liberation. After that digression into the chimney in the old hall, I can now go back to Narayana Iyer's account. This is what comes next. I was soon caught in his net. The more I was with him, the more I wanted to be with him. However, I was eventually transferred to Arni, another town within the same radius of 30 miles. Living there, I missed the opportunity of the doctor friend. Losing delight and pleasure in everything except Bhagavan, I turned the monthly visits to the ashram to weekly ones, coupling Sundays with other holidays. I was always welcome on my visits to the ashram. This is a photo of Narayana Iyer standing with Bhagavan in Palakottu. The foreign gentleman behind is Guy Haig, a US engineer who lived in Palakottu in the late 1930s. Many people have suggested that Guy Haig was the model for the hero in The Razor's Edge, a best-selling novel by Somerset Maugham about an American engineer who comes to India and spends time with a guru who is clearly Bhagavan under a different name. In the book, Bhagavan is called Sri Ganesha. Somerset Maugham visited Bhagavan in the late 1930s, but Guy Haig was not there at the time, and there is no evidence that the two of them ever met. This is Narayana Iyer sitting on the floor behind Bhagavan in the old hall. As a government employee, Narayana Iyer was frequently transferred at the whims of his superiors. Usually, the towns he was sent to were close enough for weekend visits to Tiruvannamalai. At the time of this story, he was actually posted to the sub-registry office in Tiruvannamalai, which was very convenient for him. Any neighbouring town within 35 kilometres of Tiruvannamalai was considered by him to be close enough for a convenient weekend commute. On one occasion, though, he was transferred to a far more distant town, Tiruchirappalli, which was almost 190 kilometres away. He felt that this transfer had been orchestrated maliciously by someone in his office who, knowing his predilection for spending his free time with Bhagavan in Tiruvannamalai, went out of his way to get him posted to a distant place that would make it very hard to visit. Remember, travel times in those days were much slower. Using public transport, a 380-kilometre round trip would have given him almost no time in Tiruvannamalai. In those days, government offices worked on Saturdays, so that would only give him a little over a day to go to Tiruvannamalai, have a few hours with Bhagavan, and then return back home. To give an extreme but similar example of this, in the 1990s, when I was living in Lucknow with Papaji, I met an old woman who had visited Bhagavan in Tiruvannamalai during her summer holidays in the 1940s. She was an Austrian Jew who had escaped the Holocaust in Europe by taking a job in India as a nanny or a governess to a British family. As was traditional in those days, the family went to the Himalayan resort of Simla in the hottest months to dodge the heat of the plains. Her annual leave, she told me, was 14 days. She decided to take it all 1 year while her employers were cooling themselves in the Himalayas. She had a strong desire to see Bhagavan. I had no idea how she found out about him, and was prepared to use all her annual leave to spend a little time with him. When I spoke to her in Lucknow, she told me it had taken her five days to get to Tiruvannamalai and 5 days to get back to Simla, meaning she only had 4 days at Ramana Maharshi with Bhagavan. One has to admire determination of that sort, especially when the goal is to spend time in the company of a jnani. Narayana Iyer's plight was not quite as bad as this lady's, but the Tiruchirappalli posting was a major blow to his ambitions to spend a lot of time with Bhagavan. I'm now going to let Devaraja Mudalya, compiler of Day by Day with Bhagavan, take up the narrative here, since both he and Narayana Iyer worked for the government and both at different times had problems with their bosses. Devaraja Mudalya, seen here on the right, was a lawyer by profession. He had been harassed by a junior judge early in his career, and that judge had tried to make life hard for him. On that occasion, he responded by writing out a Tamil verse and handing it over to Bhagavan. This is how Mudalya described the situation and what he did about it. I quoted from a Tamil text: "If anybody should intend harm to adoring devotees, it, Lord Muruga's spear, will destroy root and branch their entire family and be my unique support." And underlined the words, "be my unique support," as I honestly was not asking for any punishment for the fellow, but only protection for myself. After writing this letter to Bhagavan, the sub-judge never again gave me any sort of trouble. Having successfully appealed to Bhagavan in the matter of his own office problems, Devaraja Mudalya then decided to bring the problem of Narayana Iyer's transfer to Bhagavan, and this is what he wrote in his own book. When I was a permanent resident at the ashram, R. Narayana Iyer, a great devotee of Bhagavan, was suddenly transferred from Tiruvannamalai to Tiruchirappalli through the machinations of a man in the registration department. As Narayana Iyer felt it to be a terrible calamity to be sent away so far from Bhagavan, and as I believed it was the work of an enemy who was deliberately trying to harm him, I pleaded with Bhagavan. When it is known that a man deliberately does something simply to harm one of us, such as transferring him not in the usual course in the exigencies of public service, but out of malice, should Bhagavan remain passive and do nothing about it? That's Narayana Iyer on the left and Devaraja Mudalya on the right. Devaraja Udali, remember, had sung the verse to Bhagavan when his own bosses were trying to make trouble for him. Sensing that Narayana Iyer was in a similar situation, he went to the hall and sang the same verse to plead for Bhagavan's intervention in the case of Narayana Iyer. And this is what he wrote. On the following day, I sang before Bhagavan the whole song previously mentioned, and while I was singing the line, if anybody should intend harm to adoring devotees, and so on, in walked Narayana Iyer. Bhagavan said, you are just singing that line, and in he comes. Narayana Iyer and I regarded this as a good augury. He went to Tiruchi, and after having darshan of all the famous temples in and around that town, returned within a week. His transfer to Tiruchi was cancelled, and he was posted instead to Tirukoilur, which is very near Tiruvannamalai. Tirukoilur is less than 25 kilometers from Tiruvannamalai. At the bottom of the slide, there is another photo of Devaraja Udali, and next to him is Narayana Iyer. Before I continue with Narayana Iyer's narrative, I want to mention one odd fact. There are very few photos of Devaraja Udali, and none, so far as I'm aware, of him in the same photo as Bhagavan. I find this to be a little perplexing. Devaraja Udali was a full-time resident of Ramana for several years in the 1940s, and he visited the ashram regularly in the 1930s when he was stationed in Chittor, a town about 100 kilometers north of Tiruvannamalai. There are plenty of photos of Narayana Iyer with Bhagavan, even though he was mostly only able to visit at weekends. Maybe Devaraja Udali was a little bit camera shy, who knows. While I was looking through the available photos of Narayana Iyer in preparation for this talk, it struck me that many of them were taken in places that were not available to most devotees. When Bhagavan went for a walk on the hill, for example, it was rare that anyone other than his attendant would be invited. The same thing can be said of his post-lunch walks to Palakottu. Narayana Iyer features prominently in both these activities. There are many photos of him sitting on the hill with Bhagavan or walking nearby. This indicates to me that Bhagavan had a great love and affection for Narayana Iyer and was happy to have him tag along when he went out for a walk. Very few other devotees had this privilege on a regular basis. The next story about Narayana Iyer is narrated by Ganeshan, Bhagavan's grandnephew. It concerns an incident when Narayana Iyer was having money troubles. This group photo is getting quite a few outings in my recent presentations because it contains so many of Bhagavan's devotees in one group shot. In this iteration, Ganeshan, the narrator of the story, is standing in the back, circled. Devaraja Udali is the devotee circled on the left, while Narayana Iyer is circled on the right. Before I begin the story, I should mention that Bhagavan had no objection to devotees bringing personal problems to his attention and asking for some positive resolution of them. He seemed to feel that listening to these stories was part of his job. Also, Bhagavan knew from experience that the power of the jnani could indirectly deal with these issues in a way that would be beneficial to the devotee. Bhagavan never did anything when these problems were presented to him, but if they were brought to his attention, some divine power would often take care of them. Bhagavan often used the English phrase automatic divine activity to describe what had happened when these situations were favorably resolved. He himself never took responsibility for any of the outcomes that resulted from devotees pleading with him for help. This is Ganeshan's account. When Narayana Iyer's eldest daughter was to be married, Narayana Iyer had no money for the betrothal. According to Hindu tradition, there is a ceremony and a puja for which a few things are necessary. Narayana Iyer's wife said, "Why don't you go and appeal to Bhagavan?" He replied, "I will never go and appeal to Bhagavan for material things." Ganeshan is the boy on the left of the front row. This is a family group shot taken on the lower slopes of Arunachala. Ganeshan's brothers, sister, and father are also in the photo with Bhagavan. Ganeshan continues. She, that's Narayana Iyer's wife, Lalita, prayed to Bhagavan silently, telling him of the importance of the betrothal. The couple then went to see Bhagavan and prostrated before him. They did not breathe a word of the matter. The next morning, the postman arrived with a money order of 51 rupees. I myself have seen the counterfoil of this money order. Narayana Iyer has shown it to me. It had come from Ahmedabad, which is a good 1,000 miles away from Tiruvannamalai. There was a message saying, letter follows. The couple bought whatever they needed with the money. The prospective groom came and was received well, and the wedding was fixed. The couple waited anxiously for the letter that was to follow. It arrived later from a Gujarati gentleman in Ahmedabad. The couple did not know him at all. He wrote, Dear Narayana Iyer, Bhagavan Ramana Maharshi appeared in my dream and told me that I have to immediately telegraph a money order of rupees 51. He also gave me your address. I do not know you, and I do not know what the money is for. Please do not refuse the money. Please accept it. Ganeshan noted in his account that Narayana Iyer had also shown this letter to him. It wasn't information he received secondhand. Ganeshan concludes his story. Narayana Iyer, his wife, and their daughter went before Bhagavan. They wept and prostrated before him and said, Bhagavan, what grace are you showering on us? Bhagavan read the letter as though someone else had showered the grace. He then focused his attention on both of them and said, Why doubt? Why should you not ask me? This is what I want to share with you. It is not just for spiritual fulfillment that we have come to the Master. When the Supreme Master is capable of granting you the highest thing, which is self-realization, will he not fulfill your prayers for mundane things? Assuming that this is an accurate recording, this is quite a rare statement by Bhagavan. Many devotees have stories of appealing to Bhagavan and getting seemingly miraculous responses. However, I can't think of any other occasion when Bhagavan directly encouraged devotees to make use of him in this way. Narayana Iyer now continues with his own recollections of Bhagavan and his teachings. The next story continues with the theme of Bhagavan appearing to intervene in a positive way in the affairs of devotees. One day, when I was sitting by the side of Sri Bhagavan, I felt so miserable that I put the following question to him. Is the Sankalpa wish of the Jnani not capable of warding off the destinies of the devotees? Bhagavan smiled and said, Does the Jnani have a Sankalpa at all? The Jiva Mukta can have no Sankalpas whatsoever. It is just impossible. Narayana Iyer happens to be sitting by the side of Bhagavan in this photo, which was taken at Skandashram in the mid-1940s. Narayana Iyer, continued, Then what is the fate of all of us who pray to you to have grace on us and save us? Will we not be benefited or saved by sitting in front of you or coming to you? What use is there then for family men like me to gain by coming here to you? Narayana Iyer continues, Bhagavan turned graciously to me and said, Just as a trouble or arrow that comes to destroy the head goes away carrying with it only the turban, so a person's bad karma will be considerably reduced while he is in the presence of a jnani. A jnani has no sankalpa, but his sanidhi, presence, is the most powerful force. He need not have sankalpa, but his presiding presence, the most powerful force, can do wonders, save souls, give peace of mind, even liberation to right souls. Your prayers are not answered by him, but absorbed by his presence. His presence saves you, wards off the karma, and gives you the boons, as the case may be, involuntarily. The jnani does save the devotees, but not by sankalpa, which is non-existent in him, but only through his presiding presence, sanidhi. In the Tamil-speaking world, there is a widespread belief that karma is a large and heavy bundle that one keeps on one's head. That makes the arrow removing the cloth turban without injuring the head a nice analogy for the removal of karma. This idea about the removal of karma from the top of the head is at the core of a story that Ramaswami Pillai, seen here, standing behind Bhagavan with his arms folded, used to tell. He said, on the screen, I asked Bhagavan once, how can I tell if a choice that presents itself is something that needs to be done, or is something that will be beneficial for me, and how can I tell if it is something that I should avoid doing? Bhagavan responded by saying, throw it on the ground 3 times. If it jumps back 3 times, then it is something that has to be done. Bhagavan was referring here to the idea that karma is a bundle on one's head. You can try and throw it off a few times, but if it jumps back and refuses to leave, then it is something you have to do, something that is unavoidably part of your prarabdha. Back now to Narayana Iyer. This was his response to Bhagavan's statements on sanity and the Sankalpa-free state of the jnani. I was filled with joy. Even today, his presence is the most powerful thing, and that alone, I am confident, saves me. I think this explanation of the jnani's sanity is one of the most revealing statements Bhagavan ever made about the nature of jnana and how its power and presence works on devotees. The jnani never has a desire to help someone, since that would imply separation. It would also imply that he, the jnani, has something that others don't, and that he can use his power to uplift or benefit others. What Bhagavan is saying here is that the effortless and desire-free self-abidance of the jnani creates an energy field, a sanity, that takes care of all the desires of devotees who approach his physical form with a problem. When I first came across this story, I liked it so much, I named the Power of the Present series after this teaching statement that Bhagavan gave out to Narayana Iyer. It is this presence, this sanity, that takes care of devotees, even as the previous slides indicated, granting them liberation when the maturity is there. There is no person called Ramana Maharshi who orchestrates all this. It is simply a process that is a consequence of the jnani's self-abidance. When I give my next talk, which will be the continuing saga of Narayana Iyer and his association with Bhagavan, I'm going to start with this quote and discuss the implications of how this process meshes with the karma of devotees. Bhagavan is on record as saying that everything that a person undergoes is predestined, and that the only true freedom we have is not to identify with the body that is undergoing its scripted actions. In this teaching recorded by Narayana Iyer, though, Bhagavan is clearly admitting that the sanity can mitigate karma, meaning that karma is not as fixed as some of Bhagavan's other comments might indicate. My discussion on this will be quite lengthy, so I will save it for the next talk. And that means I've come to the end of my time today, so I will pause here and continue next month. Thanks for attending. Thanks for listening. If anyone has any questions on Narayana Iyer or any of the topics I talked about today.
This is a question about, it says that the power of, so this is about, he's saying that as David is using an unpublished chapter from The Power of the Presence, perhaps he would be happy to answer a question about his selection process for The Power of Presence. Walter Kears is the only European devotee included. Was there some reason to end volume 3 with a chapter on him? And is he planning to publish anything on the other European devotees, or will Walter Kears be the only one?
Okay, several questions there. When I arranged each volume, generally I did it in chronological order. So the person who had a story about the earliest association with Bhagavan got to be chapter 1, 2. The people who were there, say in the 20s, 30s, were in the middle, and the people who came quite late had the end chapter. So as you read the book, you had a movement chronologically through Bhagavan's life. And so Walter Kears, as the person who visited Bhagavan the latest in volume 3, I think he showed up in late 1949, ended up being the final chapter of the book. That was just how the books were formatted. The other question is, will there be any more foreign devotees? The answer to that is yes. At the beginning of the talk, I mentioned that I've already brought out part 2 of The Power of the Presence, and I included in it a chapter on Ramana Maharshi, the Swedish devotee who came to Bhagavan in 1949. That was published a year or so ago. Since then, I've been contacted by a man in Sweden who's managed to track down a lot of family details of Ramananda, and some of the often repeated, fables about Ramananda have been struck from the record. So also we have a lot more information about his early years in India, the people he met, his movements in India. So somewhere down the line, I might make a good talk. I won't revise that chapter, but I'll make a good talk out of him, and I'll tell you everything I know about Ramana Giri. So the plan was to expand the Power of the Present series, firstly by adding photos, and secondly by adding one chapter to each book. That meant finding a new devotee for each of the 3 volumes. Ramana Giri was the selected devotee for part 2, which is out. Narayana Iyer, who I spoke about today, is the man selected for part 1. I haven't fully settled on part 3, but my inclination right now is to go for Maurice Friedman. So that answers the question as well. Yes, there will be one more foreign devotee. I think Maurice is one of the most outstanding devotees that Bhagavan had, who unfortunately managed to cover his tracks quite a lot. I've been diligently trying to track down reliable information on him for years, and I may bring out some of it in a chapter in Power of the Present Part 3, and somewhere down the line, I guess I'm going to talk about him in this series as well. I love talking about Maurice. He's one of my heroes, so I'll be more than happy to add a chapter about him, and more than happy to talk about him later.
Of course, there were some other foreign devotees like David McKeever, and of course Chadwick, of course, yes. And
I'm tending to focus on material that hasn't come out before. David McKeever, I think not much is known about him, probably not enough for a chapter. A lot of the other people wrote their own stories, such as Chadwick wrote his own account. And of course, there's now a monster 1,000-page biography of him that came out. I'm looking for, I won't say offbeat, I'm looking for things which are a bit unusual, things that might originally have appeared in some Indian language, which didn't get very wide distribution in English. That's how a lot of the chapters in part 1 came out. For example, Siva Prakash and Pillai's poems, they were chanted every day at Ramana ashram, but they didn't exist in English until me and Venkata Subramanian sat down and did them all. Akalandama, Rangan, all of these people had great stories, but their accounts were very little known. So my original object was to hunt around the forgotten corners of the Ramana world, find some great stories, write them up properly, and bring them to attention of a more global audience.
So one is to everyone from Pasquale, France. It says, "Hi David, thanks for your talks and all the work you did. Can you tell us about the grace of the Guru? Can it be bestowed through just the reading of his written words? Thank you very much."
That's something else I might spend a whole hour talking about somewhere down the line. I am firmly of the conviction that if you are a jnani, when you tell devotees the truth of who they are, if you say you are consciousness, you are Brahman, then there is a power in those words that bypasses the mind and gives you the experience of those words directly. When Bhagavan or someone of his stature says, you are Brahman, you are the self, he's not encouraging you to do something, he's simply giving out a statement of what you are. And there's such a power in those words that the grace of the self can give you that experience in that moment. There's something about hearing those words directly from someone who's in that state that reveals that experience to you. So I think you can extend that to written words. I think if you are reading the words of a jnani, then that same power is present. People often ask me, recommend a good book, what should I read? I tend not to give specific titles. What I do say is find a jnani who resonates with you, someone who you feel embodies the truth, whose teachings resonate with you, and read his words. Just read the words of the jnani and let those words settle into your heart, not into your mind. Don't think about them. Don't argue inside yourself. Are they true? What do they mean? What are the implications of these words? That's wasting the power that the words contain. Hear the words, let them settle inside you, and if it's your lucky day, those words themselves will reveal the truth to you.
So one more question. It's directed to me, but which is for you. I don't understand what the source of predestination would be. Is it possible to elaborate?
I think that's something that I'm going to talk about a lot next week. Bhagavan said that what survives physical death of the body is not a jiva, but the vasanas, the collection of desires which haven't been exhausted, haven't been fulfilled. And he said the next birth comes about when the power of the self, the Shakti of the self, interacts with those vasanas and creates a new world, a new body, and the whole movie continues. So Bhagavan said that the prarabdha, the allocation of prarabdha is part of this process, that somehow the power or light of the self interacts with your pending vasanas and creates a new world in which you have a script. So verse 6 of Ashtakam, he says the process happens, it creates an internal observer, an external world, and he says the world of prarabdha, there's a destiny that comes from this process. So you're put into a new world through the power of your desires. Those desires make you go through all these things, and that's the prarabdha which to some extent is fixed. I'm going to go into this next week about how ultimately fixed this is. The source of it is interesting. You can say it impersonally. You can say the power of the self interacting with the vasanas makes a new jiva, a new world for it to live in. But Bhagavan also took the Saiva line on this, which is very dualistic and a bit different. And he said that when we pass away, there's a whole body of karma that hasn't been exhausted. And then he said, Ishwara, God, goes through your collection of unused karmas and allocates a sequence of events for you to experience. And he does it in a way that he thinks will be beneficial for your spiritual progress. So it's not a random process. He is putting a God figure into it and saying that Ishwara somehow is the bestower of karma, that he gives you the sequence for all the karmas to move through one by one. And he does it out of love. This is the Saiva idea, that you're not being punished by your prarabdha, you're actually receiving a gift, a prasad of God. He's bestowing his love on you by giving you a sequence of activities which he thinks will be best for you to make spiritual progress. So that's the Saiva idea that Bhagavan often spoke about. And of course, in Upadesha Undiyar, verse 1, he says, actions bear fruit by the ordinance of God. That's the Ishwara he's talking about. God allocates the karmas, and it's only through Ishwara's determination that actions have consequences, but God gives you those actions to undergo in the hope that you will somehow benefit spiritually from them. So you can look at this from two ways. You can say the power of the self interacts with your vasanas to make a new prarabdha, or you can take the more dualistic line, which Bhagavan occasionally did, and say that Ishwara allocates prarabdha, and he does it in a way that he thinks will most benefit your next life.